The candidates have spoken.
Ask yourself if you've heard these promises from Senator Cornyn before. And then ask yourself why he hasn't been able to deliver on them.
I don't believe we need to make Texas like Chuck Schumer's New York or Nancy Pelosi's California, which is the policies embraced by my opponent would do. We need to make the rest of the country more like Texas.
John Cornyn and MJ Hegar meet for the first time on the debate stage.
Respect is on the ballot. Respect for Medicare recipients whose benefits are threatened, for the energy workers who would be put out of work by the policies embraced by my opponent, and respect for law enforcement.
Each highlighting different visions for Texas and the country.
Y'all, we need to start electing servant leaders who can set aside their self-interest, ask what's best for our country, not their careers, and attack the problems that we have head on.
Now we look closer at the candidates and how their ideas could affect you and your family. But we're also going beyond the debate stage, digging deeper into an election like no other. We examine key races around Texas and how the outcomes could shape the state's future for years to come. An in-depth look on this special edition of State of Texas. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle, the host of State of Texas. Each week, we come to you on Sunday mornings to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics. For the next hour, this special edition will have in-depth analysis of the U.S. Senate debate between John Cornyn and MJ Hegar, as well as some of the key races around Texas shaping this election. We are coming to you live from the Texas State History Museum, where the debate just wrapped up, and now our team is setting up for post-debate coverage. There's no live audience, and we are following coronavirus social distancing guidelines set by the CDC to keep us all safe. Every person who's part of the program answered health screening questions and had their temperatures checked as they entered the building, and everyone who will be on stage tested negative for COVID-19. Now, one memorable moment came early tonight when the candidates were asked about coronavirus relief and stimulus checks. Here's what they had to say.
I believe we need more stimulus. I'm upset that the government and the Senate haven't acted in over 6 months. I was upset that John Cornyn said that he didn't feel a sense of urgency to get more relief out, said that multiple times. I'd like to see us get the pandemic under control by listening to public health experts and data, and then I'd like to see us get the economic crisis under control for regular working Americans and Texans.
I've actually done something about it by supporting this bipartisan $3.8 trillion expenditure, but we need to do more, and I hope that the White House and Speaker Pelosi will continue to negotiate. But what I don't understand is MJ's, the chief sponsor for her candidacy, Chuck Schumer, single-handedly blocked $500 trillion in additional spending that would have made sure that a vaccine would have been available at the end of the year.
All right, for insight, we turn to two veterans in Texas politics. Joining us now is Kirk Watson, a former Democratic state senator from Austin. He's now the founding dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. Also joining us is Larry Gonzalez, a former Republican state representative from Round Rock. He's now a senior consultant with Hush Blackwell Strategies in Austin. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, you just heard the candidates talk about coronavirus relief. Senator, let's start with you. What did you think about their answers?
Well, it was one of those answers where you can tell both of them would like to say more about what they would like to see done, but there was some effort to not get too far out in front of the public on some of those issues. I think something like that helps the person who is challenging an incumbent senator. And the reason for that is while that incumbent has in fact voted for stimulus in the past, when you ask the question right now, today, people want more to happen. And so when they're interpreting how those answers that are kind of bouncing around on what they would really do or what they really want to do, folks want something to happen right now. And that's going to, I think, work against the incumbent because you're the one in office. What are we going to do?
And so much of this question is tied to direct stimulus checks.
That's right.
Representative, what do you think about their answers?
Well, I think advantage to Senator Cornyn, who, as he said, I think they gave the best answer of the entire debate, which is, I already have. You know, that's what the incumbent has done when you put that $20 billion into the system. I mean, I think there are a lot of school administrators, university officials, and people who want the infrastructure who understand what that first check did and what it means. So I think that's a pretty big example of what it is to be the incumbent, to have to be part of a bipartisan effort. I think that was a really good answer tonight.
All right, we are waiting to hear post-debate comments from the candidates. Politics reporter John Hinkle is live just outside the theater to talk to MJ Hegar. John, what's going on?
Hey there, Josh. Yeah, MJ Hegar straight off of that debate stage, ready to join us here, the Democratic nominee facing off against John Cornyn. MJ, when you were walking out of the room, you said, I have a lot more I wanted to say.
I did.
What did you want to say?
I just want Texas voters to be able to compare what John Cornyn says with his actual record. I mean, he has ads out there talking about protecting pre-existing conditions. We didn't even talk about health care tonight, and that's the #1 issue I hear about on the campaign trail. He's voting time and time again, over 20 times, to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which is our current protections for pre-existing conditions. Yet the PROTECT Act that he wants to replace the Affordable Care Act with has been PolitiFact-checked false, that it does not protect pre-existing conditions. It keeps us from being denied coverage for having a pre-existing condition, but then the insurance companies can deny coverage of that condition or anything complicated by that condition. So if you have hypertension and you get COVID and there's complications and you're in the ICU, they can decline coverage for the entire thing. It's a farce. I wanted to talk about immigration. He has ads out talking about protecting dreamers, but he voted for one Clean Dream Act in 2003 and has voted against it ever since, and recently called it, he wished the president would support one because it would give him political cover. The man does not see us, regular, hardworking Texans. Anyone that doesn't look and sound exactly like him, he's not representing. And I'm disappointed I didn't get a better opportunity to really talk about his actual record. 60-second answers, he lied a lot about my positions, and so there was, this misinformation and this finger pointing and partisan back and forth is what's wrong with our government right now. And I would like a format that, gets more in-depth into the solutions to these challenges.
Yeah, and Senator Cornyn tried really hard right off the bat to set the tone, associating you with D.C. Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and saying that you were an immediate vote for them. You fought back about that almost instantly.
Of course he did, because he can't run against me, because he knows that the people who are supporting my campaign are the Texas people, the hundreds of thousands of unique donors, while he's got all this corporate PAC money coming from the health insurance industry. I mean, of course, because he's $5 from that industry we didn't get to talk about. Millions from places like the gun lobby and private detention centers. We didn't get to talk about gun safety. I mean, I don't know. I guess voters have opportunities to hear where we both stand on these things, but these things are really important. They are kitchen table issues. They are life and death issues to regular, hardworking Texans like me and my family. And I mean, he just wants to talk about D.C. and Schumer and Warren, and I understand that's the world and the bubble he's been living in for 18 years. But I want to talk about hardworking Texans and actual solutions to the challenges that we're facing.
Well, and hopefully we get more of these forums, too, to hear from both of you before
That'd be great. Please ask him to agree to the two that we've agreed to.
MJ, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you participating in this debate, and we want to also note that we did invite Senator Cornyn to be a part of this post-debate exchange. He declined, his campaign declined to speak with us about this. So for now, we'll send it back to you, Josh, after talking to Democratic nominee MJ Hegar.
John, thank you very much. And Representative, quickly, if we could come to you with the Republican outlook on this, since John Cornyn's not here, what do you think about what MJ Hegar had to say just now?
Well, I think it can be very difficult to run against somebody in their issues when they're not specific enough in their issues. During the debate, I had kind of running a list of the questions I was hearing, and then a John Cornyn, MJ Hegar looking for answers. Yes or no, did they answer a specific question, right? The details of the question. And it's hard to run against somebody when most of the time I had a question mark next to the yes or the no. I mean, even I'm sitting back there a little unclear as to what the answers always were, right? And so, as Senator Watson knows, we've shared many years on the chamber floor together, was those nuances are extremely important. It's your job as a U.S. Senator to understand the nuances and to hear the nuances and to work within the nuances of what that means. So when you say that he voted once for this bill and 4 times against it, we all know that it's the nuances of those other bills that are critical. That's what a senator does. A senator digs down into those specifics. It's not generalities. It's not just big, vague statements. You have to get into the individual instances. And so it's difficult at times, right, to run against somebody who's not getting into that level of detail.
All right, we'll catch up with both of you in a little while, but when we come back, we'll dive deeper into tonight's debate and the candidates' answers to questions about the coronavirus vaccine. And later, we'll go beyond the debate and look at issues and races affecting voters in communities across Texas. You're watching a special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas. We are coming to you from the Texas State History Museum, where John Cornyn and MJ Hegar just wrapped up their U.S. Senate debate. We asked the candidates about the coronavirus vaccine and if it should be mandatory for students to get the vaccine before returning to school. Here's what they had to say.
I'm actually not a huge fan of the government mandating things on your body, but especially when it comes to, we don't have the right to make other people sick and to put other people and their kids at risk. So yes, I support vaccinations.
I think the people who should get the vaccine first are the people who are most likely to die if they get COVID-19, which means people over 80 and people with underlying chronic illnesses. 99% roughly of the people who get the virus are going to recover. Some of them will end up in the hospital, but children, by and large, tolerate the virus well.
For some perspective, we turn to our roundtable now. We're joined by Gromer Jeffers, who you saw in the debate earlier, political writer for the Dallas Morning News. Eric McDaniel is a professor of government at the University of Texas. And Joshua Blank is a research director for the Texas Politics Project, also at the University of Texas. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Eric, I want to start with you. What did you think about what the candidates had to say about the coronavirus vaccine and possibly making it mandatory for kids before they go back to school in Texas?
This is a very tricky thing to discuss because it's the line between public health and, again, civil liberties. And this is what we've seen happen regarding measles vaccinations, where we've allowed individuals to be able to choose whether or not their child will be vaccinated, but that has led to massive complications, as you saw going on in California. And the two states that basically give very little restrictions are West Virginia and Mississippi, and they have been the least likely to see a measles outbreak. So this is a problematic thing regarding, again, issues regarding civil liberties, but then on top of this, considering the level of faith that people have in the government and trust in the government right now, if a vaccine does come out, do people actually believe the vaccine is effective and not something that's been rushed out for political reasons?
Joshua, you've been monitoring polling on this issue. What are you thinking about after hearing what the candidates have to say?
Yeah, I mean, I agree largely with what Professor McDaniel said, and I think, the key point there is, it's always different when you're talking about kids versus when you're talking about adults, and that makes things a little bit more difficult. But I think, broadly, what you saw from both candidates in some ways was sort of a tepid embrace of vaccines, and I think that's because they're both trying to manage different cross-currents within their parties. So, for Senator Cornyn, there is a small but active minority within the Republican Party who are very skeptical about vaccines, and certainly a larger share of Republicans who are skeptical of mandates in general. And so for MJ Hegar, what she has is she has a party that's definitely more embracing of science and the vaccines, but they're not trusting the process right now. Regardless of which candidate wins this election, who is in the White House and who's in control of the Congress, everybody needs compliance. And so I think that's how you could see these different responses here. Hegar said, yeah, I'll trust vaccines if the doctors put it through a process that we can trust. And Cornyn was very quick to say, yeah, I mean, I'll get one, but I'm not going to rush out the door to get one, which I think, speaks to, I think, both parties' orientations, both towards the virus and the process. But again, in the context of the fact that they need compliance.
Mm-hmm. Gromer, I know that when we were listening to them, it didn't seem like they had a direct answer about what to do when it comes to children in this issue, but they did bring up some other interesting points. For instance, Senator Cornyn talked about the balance, because when kids are not at school, but maybe they can't afford, some of the technology, or they do have technology challenges to get that virtual learning done. So it's kind of a give and take.
Yeah, it is, and and the whole vaccine issue was made easier for them because right now we actually don't have a vaccine. So they were talking in theory, so to speak. But just think about this. It's hard to get a lot of people out there to wear masks. And so on one level, it's good that they're having this discussion right now, at least to prime the pump, so to speak, to get people ready and children ready to take a vaccine, because this mask thing snuck up on everybody. You just think it's a political issue now, and there are folks who don't really want to wear it. And so hopefully a vaccine won't have those sort of political currents tied with it, but maybe it will.
Much of this debate has been about influence, largely Senator Cornyn trying to assert that Chuck Schumer recruited Hegar. Listen to this.
Chuck Schumer would lead all the Democrats in the United States Senate to vote against a $500 billion relief package to help people with COVID, and to fund the Operation Warp Speed, which is designed to deliver 300 million doses of vaccine by the end of this year. That's the people who are supporting MJ, the people who recruited her and her donors, and the first vote she will cast will be for Chuck Schumer as the leader.
All right, let's move on to Gromer with the next question.
I think I should get an opportunity to respond.
Take 15 seconds, please.
I'm MJ Hegar. I'm a Purple Heart combat veteran and a working mom of two, and I am your opponent. I'm the person you're running against. As inconvenient as that is for you, it's my ideas and my support in this state that you're going to have to face in this election.
Can I respond?
Go ahead.
Respond to my response.
I'm worried about the people who are bankrolling your campaign, the Hollywood celebrities.
Let's talk about that.
And the,
Can we talk about who's donating to our campaigns? Because that actually is very important.
$6 million into her primary race.
Okay.
Against Royce West.
Actually, the people who are donating to our campaigns are the reason of the lack of action.
All right, let's move on to the Supreme Court, maybe.
Well, there you go, Gromer. And I know one of your other questions was, why don't people recognize you, Senator Cornyn? So it was kind of like a battle of identities tonight.
Yeah, it was, and that they're trying to get the same message across about each other, basically, that MJ Hegar is trying to say that John Cornyn is out of touch, that Texans, they really don't know him because he doesn't really do anything that's relevant for him, and Cornyn is trying to say, look out, MJ Hegar is being backed by Schumer, and he didn't say it a lot tonight, but Hollywood elites and those folks, and so in a way it's the familiar talking points that we get in these kind of races. And what's fascinating about this race is that it's being staged in not Texas 10 years ago, but Texas in 2020, a state that could be on the verge of getting more and more Democratic and even flipping.
We'll catch up with all of you in a bit, but when we come back, we'll get a different perspective on the Senate debate, how the answers from the candidates could play in different communities across Texas. Welcome back to the Texas State History Museum, site of the U.S. Senate debate tonight. We heard the candidates lay out their different approaches to immigration and asylum seekers. Here's what they had to say when we asked about them.
The COVID-19 has thrown everything on its ear, and I know that Mexico is struggling as we are struggling, but perhaps it's even worse there with dealing with COVID-19. I believe that the keeping people out of the country during this crisis is a public health measure that we should support. But it's important to know that, other things come across the border other than asylum seekers, drugs, human trafficking, even Chinese fentanyl. And MJ has demonstrated her lack of regard for the job that we've asked the Border Patrol to do there. It's a tough job.
It's racist to keep referring to the Chinese over and over again and stoking anti-Chinese sentiment among many Chinese Americans that are living here that are facing that type of anti-immigrant sentiment. He also said he supported it as a public health measure, but he supported it before COVID-19. Look, y'all, there's a reason that when Mitch McConnell asked John McCain to commission a group of senators to work on immigration reform, he said no to allowing John Cornyn to be a part of it. He has consistently voted against broad, bipartisan immigration reform. We need to reform immigration. I do not support Remain in Mexico. I think we need to be treating asylum seekers from our southern border the same way we treat them from every other place around the world, not asking what the color of their skin is, their religion, or whether or not they have access to health care.
All right, we want to bring you perspective from across the state. We're joined by our panel of reporters. Jackie Kingston is a news anchor for KAMR Local 4 in Amarillo. Sandra Sanchez is a correspondent for Nextstar's BorderReport.com. And we welcome back Gromer Jeffers from the Dallas Morning News. So you heard what the candidates had to say about immigration. Jackie, I want to start with you because this is a big topic in the Panhandle.
Absolutely. Immigration, particularly our southern border, resonates in the Panhandle because so many of our small towns in the rural communities that we have are so dependent on seasonal workers and on immigrants who are in our country to go to work and to make a better life for themselves. And so they're the backbone of our economy in many of these smaller towns where you see people who grew up there maybe leaving, going to school, and not coming back. And so they've filled a void in those towns. And so we absolutely rely on those immigrants for the great things they do for our economy.
And of course, Sandra, you covering the border, this is an issue you deal with almost daily.
It is. And I just have to say, frankly, I was disappointed that both candidates did not discuss immigration more. I know that just now in the post-debate interview, MJ Hegar briefly said she wished she would have discussed immigration, but I feel like at any point during the hour-long discussion, they could have pivoted to it. Senator Cornyn tried to paint her in a corner as being unsupportive of Border Patrol and law enforcement officials, and that would have been unsympathetic to them. And I felt like that would have been the perfect opportunity for her to have talked about the sympathy towards the families in South Texas or along the border that have their homes and their ranches bisected and taken apart by eminent domain for the border wall. But instead, she didn't talk about border security. With regards to the asylum seekers, I also wondered if she really understood the Migrant Protection Protocols program all that well. She spent a lot of time talking about the rights of Chinese people. You know, in the discussion earlier tonight, they discussed systemic racism. Well, that extends to low-income minority communities. I just felt like there were many opportunities that they could have talked about immigration more.
Yeah, Gromer, there's so many topics that, you know, we wish we could ask the candidates, but we only had an hour with them. When we're talking about immigration and you saw the pivot to something like systemic racism, what were your thoughts there?
Well, I'll tell you this, we could have an hour and a half, 2-hour show on immigration alone, right? 2-hour debate. I sympathize with them in that respect, but you're absolutely right. They could have used the hour to sort of weave in their views on immigration and, quite frankly, have better answers to the question that I had. You know, basically, they retreated to their talking points and got in their shots, but that was basically it. There was not a whole lot of substance to the policy discussion to be had. And so in that respect, it was disappointing. I mean, not just with immigration, but other questions. You always had to get them to say, okay, well, is it yes or no? Or what's your answer on this? Because they would retreat to their talking points.
Which is a good segue, because when we come back, we'll take a discussion beyond the debate. We'll look closer at some of the issues and races affecting voters in communities across the state. You're watching a special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas. Once again, I am Josh Hinkle, and each week we come to you on Sunday morning on this next star station to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics. Beyond the race for Senate, items deeper down the ballot will also have a major impact at the local level. We asked anchors and reporters from our stations around Texas to tell us what was important for voters in their parts of the state. Here's what they had to say.
I'm Brian Mudd in Lubbock, where the real question is how many angry voters will actually get out and vote. A lot of smaller mom and pop owned shops forced to close the doors because of COVID restrictions. Others barely hanging on and now taking that ire out on incumbent leaders, despite the fact the orders essentially came from the governor's office. For example, Lubbock's heretofore popular mayor, Dan Pope, facing a surprising challenge from a political outsider and suddenly heavily financed Stephen Sanders, and a 20-year-old county commissioner, Gilbert Flores, with a strong challenge from first-time candidate farmer Kerry Shaw. Do frustrated Lubbock voters have change on their mind? It's what we're watching for when early voting starts on the 13th.
Hello, I'm Daniel Marin for KTSM 9 News in El Paso, and we've got some big races that we are watching. The biggest for us is a 6-candidate race for El Paso mayor. We have an incumbent mayor who's had a lot on his plate in his first term, including the pandemic and last summer's Walmart mass shooting that killed 23 people. There's also a former mayor in the race and a well-known local car dealer who did not seek re-election for health reasons, but he says he is healthy now and looking to get his job back. And another local race with some national implications, a very heated contest for New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. This is a rematch between Democrat incumbent Xochitl Torres Small and Republican Yvette Harrell. A lot of money is being spent on media ads from both sides. The mud is flying in this race. So that's what we are watching here in El Paso. I'm Daniel Marin with KTSM 9 News.
I'm Casey Koviak with KETK News in Tyler. East Texas is home to Congressional District 1. Since 2005, that position has been held by Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert. This year, he's being challenged by Democratic opponent Hank Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert is a local rancher and business owner. This year, he says the Democrat Party is ready to flip Texas and turn it blue, starting with Congressional District 1. Now, that is some pretty stiff competition because here in Congressional District 1, Mr. Gohmert is pretty much invincible. Here in the Piney Woods of East Texas, I'm Casey Koviak.
I'm Chris Jacobs with KVEO, and I'm at Valley Baptist Medical Center in Harlingen, one of the main hospitals serving our area in the Rio Grande Valley. Now, this facility, like many others in our area, is facing a serious problem. Our region is home to 2% of the state's population, but accounts for 6% of the death toll for COVID-19 in the state. Now, the reasons for this are relatively apparent. The virus disproportionately affects minority communities, and the vast majority of people here are Hispanic. 33% of our population is living in poverty, and nearly 40% are obese. And finally, many are either underinsured or uninsured entirely, leaving them without access to quality health care. This is resulting in the high number of cases we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic.
I'm Sharon Melton with CW39 Houston. This election year here in Houston, the 4th largest city in the country, we're focused on numerous issues. For instance, COVID-19. With over 77,000 confirmed cases and over 1,200 deaths here in Houston, it is still a major concern for the city, and the numbers continue to increase. Another concern is race relations. The death of George Floyd hit this city very hard. He grew up here. Many of his family members still live here, and one of his funerals was held here in Houston. As one of the most multicultural cities in the world, the city's response to race issues and police-community relations continues to be a focus for almost everything it does. And there's also the issue of flooding. In the past 5 years, Houston has been severe flooding everywhere, every single year, and the most notable in 2017 with Hurricane Harvey. The fight over flooding relief funds between the city and the state also continues to reach new levels. And this doesn't even include the impact these storms have on the oil economy, along with jobs. Sharon Melton, CW39 Houston.
Well, as you can see from those reports, voters in different parts of the state face an interesting mix of local and national issues. Here in Austin, for instance, transportation is an issue getting a lot of attention. Voters will decide whether to approve a tax increase to fund a transit plan, as well as a bond to pay for various transportation projects. And there are several tight congressional races, most notably a battle in District 21. That pits first-term Republican incumbent Chip Roy against former Democratic State Senator Wendy Davis. Texas. Now, Jackie, I want to turn to you. You are from Amarillo. What are some of the big issues for voters in the Panhandle?
We also have a major congressional race that voters are deciding on. Congressional District 13 is larger than some states in the United States, and Representative Mac Thornberry, who has represented the people in that district for more than 2 decades, has decided to retire. So on the ballot are Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who is an admiral and a former White House doctor who touts his relationship with President Trump. He speaks on things that are happening at the White House as recently as this week, appearing to comment on the president's COVID-19 diagnosis earlier last week. His Democratic challenger is Gus Trujillo. Gus Trujillo is an office manager who did some internship work with Representative Mac Thornberry when he was there in office. There's a Libertarian candidate as well. His name is Jack Westbrook. So that's major change for the people of the High Plains in that region. Of course, it stretches all the way past Wichita Falls, east, almost to Gainesville. And so that district is a major change point for the people here on the High Plains, that representation.
All right. Well, Sandra, you're based in the Valley, but you cover areas all along the border, and people can see coverage from you and our team of reporters at borderreport.com. The website's mission is to tell the untold local stories of what's really happening along the border. Sandra, what are voters telling you down in South Texas?
Right. Well, South Texas is a Democratic stronghold, and the 3 congressmen who are up for re-election are really not threatened for their seats. However, we did see in the primary election that Henry Cuellar did take a threat from a challenger, and partly because of his previous positions on border wall. And it was very evident that the people in Laredo, in Webb County, which Cuellar represents, are very opposed to the construction of the border wall there. Basically, what we're hearing from South Texans is that they want their leaders in Congress to understand them. They are so many hours removed from the other parts of the state. It's 3 hours to San Antonio, and they feel like they are not understood, much less in Washington, D.C., much less in Austin. The economy on the border is really hurting. Currently, we have travel restrictions that have been in place since March 20th due to what's called Title 42 to try to suppress the spread of coronavirus. And that is really hurting the economies there. One bridge in McAllen has lost $2 million in revenue. So people are saying that they want their leaders to understand what's going on.
Gromer, we've all talked about some of the congressional races in our areas, but you have some of the key congressional races that the entire nation is watching right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. There are about 5 really interesting congressional races. I'll talk about a couple of them. Congressional District 24, represented now by Republican Kenny Marchant. He's retiring. Former Irving Mayor Beth Van Dyne is the Republican nominee for that seat. She's also a former Trump appointee, and she's running against Candace Valenzuela, a former school board member in Carrollton Farmers Branch District. That race is interesting because demographic shifts have made it more favorable for a Democratic candidate. So is the time now or is it later? We'll see in November. The other interesting race is District 32. Colin Allred won it against Pete Sessions in 2018. That district has been trending Democratic for many years. The result in November will tell us once and for all whether a Republican has a chance to take it back or not. Allred is being challenged by Genevieve Collins in that race. And there are several other contests. District 3 in Collin County, Van Taylor, the Republican incumbent, against Lulu Cycli. And then Ron Wright, the incumbent Republican there, has a serious challenge, as does in District 25. Roger Williams, the incumbent. Julie Oliver, the Democrat, is challenging him. So very interesting times in North Texas.
A lot happening in North Texas and the Dallas area. Gromer, we'll see you in a little bit. Sandra, Jackie, thank you for being with us tonight. And when we come back, we'll look closer at what could happen after the election at the state capitol. Lawmakers face big battles over the budget and redistricting. We continue our conversation with 2 veterans of the Texas legislature about what's at stake in the coming session. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas from the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum. I'm Josh Hinkle, and voters will decide in November whether Democrats or Republicans have control of the Texas House. That's a big deal because Republicans have controlled both the Texas Senate and the House for nearly 20 years. For insight into the stakes of this election, we're joined once again by two veterans of the Texas legislature. Kirk Watson is a former Democratic state senator from Austin. Larry Gonzalez, a former Republican state representative from Round Rock. Big challenges this session, especially when we talk about the budget and redistricting. And I know you're both very familiar, so let's start with you, Senator.
Sure. No, this is going to be a fascinating session to watch. Substantively, you've mentioned two of the biggest issues. The budget with what we've seen in terms of the economy and paying attention to things that happened, for example, like last session with the passage of HB 3, which was a transformational school finance bill. Even at the time, I was on the conference committee for that bill, and even at the time, there was worry about whether the state would live up to its commitment of continuing to fund that bill. And then COVID happened, so it adds a special sense of urgency. So the budget is a big issue. You mentioned redistricting. This is the session when we're supposed to do redistricting. The process is also going to be a key part of all of this, because with COVID and with the rules and how people are allowed in the building, if they are allowed in the building, how debate gets to take place, what sort of committee hearings you're going to have. The interim has been lost, really. We haven't seen the typical work that goes on during an interim, particularly in something like redistricting. So there's, from a variety of different angles, this is going to be a fascinating session.
So much of what the senator's talking about, that interaction between lawmakers, I mean, is also contingent on the Texans who come to, the everyday Texans who are coming to the Capitol to be witnesses during these committees and give their testimony, passionate things that they want to talk about with these issues. How is that going to be affected if we can't see them and interact with them like we normally would?
It's going to be difficult. And one advantage we've had in Texas is we've been able to watch legislatures that have been in full time. We've been watching them try to figure it out for the last several months. And hopefully, taking what worked and what didn't work and creating what our own 2021 session looks like. Unfortunately, what we've learned is they haven't gotten it right either. Yeah. There's this balance between operational government and the taxpayers' participation, and it hasn't worked yet. And so you see different states trying different things, right? We know the technology hasn't always worked. The technology has crashed all across the country. You see some states where they're meeting in the chamber, where the doors to the Capitol are closed. The open government, open transparency folks have a lot of legitimate concerns about a government operational without their participation. That's a real concern, right? So when you have a survey sent out by House administration asking the members, when will you feel safe? Asking the House members, when will you feel safe back in the building? It ranged from right now, and I'll be there when there's a vaccine. Yeah. How do you mesh those two together, right? In a way that government operates to address budget and redistricting and kind of the COVID-related items with a non-participating public. And that's the balancing act that hasn't worked across the country yet, and we haven't gotten it here yet either.
And think about what it means for the people. So that survey, that's the members. But what about people that feel very passionately about needing to participate in one way or another, and they're excluded? And for that matter, the folks that for a living go up there and advocate for positions and talk about positions. My guess is that cell phones and texting will be the way lobbying occurs this next time, and that's not going to be the best and most efficient way to do things.
We'll need to leave it there, but we will definitely be checking back on this. Thank you both for being with us. And when we come back, we'll turn back to the debate and get some final thoughts from our other panelists about how tonight's outcome could affect this key race. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas. We are wrapping up our coverage of the U.S. Senate debate between John Cornyn and MJ Hegar. We're back with our expert panelists as well. Gromer Jeffers of the Dallas Morning News, Eric McDaniel, UT government professor, and Joshua Blank with the Texas Politics Project. As we wrap up tonight, what are some of the final takeaways that you have from tonight's debate? Eric, we'll start with you.
Well, one of the things that's been made clear is that Senator Cornyn was clearly trying to paint MJ Hegar as someone who is out of touch, basically with the left or right coast, west or east coast elite. But then also she tried to paint Senator Cornyn as being out of touch, as someone who's spent all his time in Washington and is not listening to the actual needs of the people. So it was very much of an issue of being out of touch with Texas.
Joshua, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think what's interesting about these candidates, and really if you compare it to the last Senate election in 2018, is that, you know, Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz are kind of almost political forces unto themselves, both among the right and on the left. And you don't have that with these candidates. Ultimately, John Cornyn has never had, despite being in office as long as he has never had sort of the name recognition amongst the Texas electorate as a Ted Cruz, a Greg Abbott, a Donald Trump. And MJ Hegar faces the same problem that really all Democrats face running in Texas, which is that, you know, you don't have the money, the time, or the resources to introduce yourself to all the voters. And so I think, you know, what you were seeing in this debate here was sort of the last best effort before the voting starts to make this definition, to say, you know, for if you're a reluctant Republican who's, you know, maybe so-so on John Cornyn, to remind them that, look, you know, MJ Hegar is another person in Chuck Schumer's coalition, right? And I think for MJ Hegar, it was really about her, you know, sort of reminding people, or really actually I think in some ways really being forceful to get out there and try to mobilize and galvanize Democratic voters who haven't really totally come around to her yet. Now, look, the voters who know about her see her positively, but she's still not known to about a quarter of the likely Democratic voters at this point, and she really needs that to happen. I'll say one more thing. You know, in our most recent poll in University of Texas Tribune poll that we released today, Hegar was performing almost as well as Beto O'Rourke was at this point in time in the race, but the thing is she's got about a 10-point gap between how well he was doing with African Americans and how well she's doing. She's got an even bigger gap with voters under the age of 30. Ultimately, this is her last chance to try to make those voters come along and really tighten that race up.
30 seconds left. Gromer, final thought?
Yeah, the question is, you know, in 2018, we had that extraordinary race. Beto O'Rourke, Ted Cruz. Beto raised $80 million, went to 254 counties. These candidates haven't caught fire yet. This election hasn't been about the Texas Senate race. It's largely been about the presidential race. We'll see if they can get in the game, so to speak, with the short time left.
All right. Remember, you can start voting next week here in Texas. Early voting begins Tuesday, October 13th, and runs through Friday, October 30th. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. We've been coming to you from the Texas Spirit Theater at the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum. We thank the team at the museum for their help and hospitality hosting tonight's event. Thank you again for joining us for this special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll see you next Sunday for an in-depth look at Texas politics.